Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the recent news that Boris Johnson's big employment scheme was, despite his boasting, a complete failure. In fact, this programme, which was supposed to get more people into work, 500,000 more people into work, actually went hand in hand with a reduction in the number of people finding work. So it actually stopped people finding work. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So earlier this year, Boris Johnson would frequently crowbar into PMQs his job creation scheme that he claimed had helped 500,000 people into work. Now, this is an important claim for a Tory Prime Minister to be able to make, because the Conservatives' main delusion works like this. They try and persuade themselves and the rest of us that people who are in poverty are those without jobs. You hear them all the time saying that the way out of poverty is through work. We need to help people find jobs. This ignores the fact that the majority of people on universal credit have jobs, full-time jobs. In fact, with the current cost of living crisis, even people with good jobs are struggling. The mainstream news media is now talking about people on 50% higher incomes than the national median and over double the minimum wage facing fuel poverty this winter. People on what are considered to be reasonable incomes facing fuel poverty. That means they can't afford to use the energy that's just a reasonable amount to use. So the claims from the Conservatives just don't stand up to even a basic level of scrutiny. But most people don't apply scrutiny at all. If the news presents them with something as if it's a fact, they just accept it. So Boris Johnson launched this, it was called the Way to Work scheme. Now, the idea was, it targeted 500,000 people and it forced them to apply for jobs outside of their skills and experience. If they didn't, they had their benefits cut. Now, with any critical thinking, you can see the way the public are supposed to view this. They'll think, oh, well, that's fair enough, isn't it? I mean, if someone can't get the job they prefer, I mean, it's nice to get the job you want, but just take any job. I mean, it's important they're productive. But the thinking is completely wrong-ended. The reason you don't waste a lot of time applying for jobs outside of your expertise is not because you don't want it. As someone who's been unemployed in the past, I will tell you it is not a pleasant life. I was going for everything I could, but you don't get those jobs. You never get those jobs. If your provable skills and attributes don't meet the job requirements, you don't get the job. So this scheme essentially aims to get job seekers to prioritise their time away from finding jobs they can do, so they'll miss some, and apply for jobs that they can't. And the recruiting manager is going to know this. As soon as you turn up, they'll go, well, you don't meet the requirements. So the scheme, when you actually think the process through in practical stages, is a nonsense. But Johnson claims that it helped 500,000 people into work. But it was a bit of a lie. The latest report shows in the period the scheme was active, about 867,000 people found work. Now, some people would have found work anyway, nothing to do with the scheme. So you have to think to yourself, so hang on a minute, how many of those found it completely separate to this scheme and how many it was caused by the scheme? So scientifically speaking, if you're going to make the claim that the scheme itself helped 500,000 people into work, there are a few processes to go through. First of all, the scheme was targeted at 500,000 people. So if you're going to say that it also helped 500,000 people into work, you can't just say, oh, well, actually more than 500,000 people found work, therefore the scheme worked. No, you can only count those who were actually on the scheme. It targeted 500,000 specific people. How many of those people found work? There's no evidence it was all 500,000 of them. Secondly, even out of the 500,000 people who targeted, who did find work, it doesn't mean the scheme found them work, because they may have found work anyway. So then you have to prove that it was down to the scheme, or at least offer up reasonable grounds. So the scheme was all about getting people to apply for jobs they weren't qualified for. So if any of the targeted people found jobs that were in line with their skills and experience, well, that can't have been anything to do with the scheme, because the scheme was about finding different types of jobs. So what you'd have to do is count out of the 500,000 people you targeted, how many of them actually found work in that period. Of those people who found work in that period, how many found work that was for jobs for which they were forced to apply for by the Department for Work and Pensions, but which were not in line with their skills and experience. At this point, it would be ridiculous to suppose that if the scheme only targeted 500,000 people that it can claim all 500,000 people found work that was not in line with their skills and experiences as a result of this scheme. It's absolute tripe. Indeed, the article I was reading said that the Office for National Statistics actually asked the government to explain, how did you identify that target and how did you measure it? But here's a third thing as well. So what you'd then have to do is you have to compare the rate of job finding in this period with an equivalent period. How many would you have expected to find work in this time? The Office for National Statistics again pointed out that the number of people finding work actually fell during this period that the scheme was in place, as compared to the previous equivalent periods. Now, I know what you'd be thinking. This was at least my initial thought. I think, well, hang on a minute. So let's say there was a big boost last year in people finding work, post-furlough and pandemic and stuff like that. Big old boost of people finding jobs. This year, it would then be harder for people to find jobs in the latest period. Not as many jobs to go about, not quite so many people looking for them. So even a successful scheme might not boast the numbers of, say, last year. But the Office for National Statistics pointed out that there are record vacancies. During this period of time, record vacancies. I've mentioned this a bit as well, haven't I? As a result of shutting ourselves off from our international continental labour market, we've got record numbers of jobs going completely unfilled. There's not the people for them. The Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey has said the number one concern he gets from businesses is they cannot find workers. So there are jobs out there. If you've got a scheme designed to get people into work and it works, it should be like shooting fish in a barrel to make it happen. While this scheme was active, it resulted in 148,000 fewer people finding work than before the scheme was active, when there weren't as many vacancies. So what we can say is that the scheme actively reduced the number of people finding work. Or can we? Is that reasonable? So was it that it just didn't help and something else caused the drop in the job finding rate? Well, I think we can say that there's a good chance the scheme may have actively stopped people finding work. Because as I said at the start, you look at the whole premise of the scheme. The premise of, so imagine your job seeker, right? They're spending all day, and I can tell you, someone who was unemployed, it took you all day. It was a full-time job, looking for work, applying for work, you know, writing good quality CVs and application forms and so on, attending the interviews and all the rest of it. So you're spending all that time trying to find jobs for which you are suitable. So this scheme says, no, you can't spend that much time. The whole premise of the scheme was getting people to show that they were applying for jobs outside of their skills and experience. And not a suggestion, because if you didn't do it, your benefits would be cut. So it wasn't enough to actually do it. I'm going to guess the DWP asked you to record it all. So there'd be extra paperwork. You'd have to prove that you were applying for jobs for which you weren't suitable. You'd probably have to prove you were doing a good job of it as well, that you were putting in decent quality applications. You weren't just paying lip service to it. So you tell someone that, and they will make sure that the Department for Work and Pensions has got no excuse to cut their benefits. They will spend a lot of time looking for these jobs that are useless and filling in the paper trail so they can show the Department for Work and Pensions that they are engaged in this scheme. So they're going to prioritise jobs that they are very unlikely to get. Basically unsuitable jobs is what they're now spending a lot of their time on. So you can see a link between cause and effect. You can imagine a hypothesis where you say, right, if you're reducing the amount of time these people are actively looking for jobs that they might get, it is reasonable to suppose that such a scheme could actually reduce the number of people who are actually finding work. It's not proof, of course, but it seems credible if you force people to apply for jobs where they can demonstrate no relevant skills or experience. Then, of course, the recruiting manager is going to say, no, as opposed to spending time applying for jobs where they do have the demonstrable skills. And the scheme was the perfect reflection of Tory thinking, wasn't it? Based on the notion that if you're poor, it's because you're lazy. But what happens when the government implements policies that are based on getting a basic fact like this wrong? You end up actively reducing the number of people finding work, which has a knock-on effect on the businesses who would like to employ those people, but they never come across each other because that potential employee didn't come across that job because they've had to spend less time looking for them. So the business suffers as well. which hits our GDP and tax revenues, which hits our public services. Public services hit makes it harder for other businesses to manage because their workers don't have access to the public services needed to make them more productive. A spiral of shit that ends up with a country facing a terrible recession and a fourth Prime Minister in about 6 years who seems intent on making the hole dug by their predecessor even deeper. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.